We are delighted to have with us a member of the Danish Parliament, Pelle Dragsted. That's actually not how you would say his last name in Danish, but I'm not going to begin to try to pronounce it in Danish, and he's given me license to say it in the American version. But anyway, Pelle's here to talk about his book, Nordic Socialism, The Path Toward a Democratic Economy. Denmark, along with other Nordic countries, has been coming up a lot in American political discussions. It's often called out by both the left and the right as an example of a socialist country. For the left, it's an example worth emulating because, particularly given the generous welfare benefits that it provides young and old alike. And for the right, it's an example of a system that overtaxes, is less efficient, and menaces freedom. But the thing is, the Danes don't see themselves as socialist. Their economic system, in fact, has many capitalistic elements, and Denmark's political system certainly has remained fundamentally democratic. So, to help set the record straight about his country and to highlight what lessons can be learned from Denmark's economic system, Pelle wrote Nordic Socialism. It was actually first published 4 years ago and is now out in English. He was joking with me just before I came out about how had he really wanted to write a bestseller in English, he would have written a Nordic noir, a crime fiction novel. But the book was, his book was actually quite popular in Denmark, where people do evidently take their politics very seriously. Anyway, Pelle is the leader of the Red-Green Alliance in Denmark, which is the furthest left party in the Danish parliament. It's actually the largest party in the city of Copenhagen. And he's a very clear thinker, as you'll see in a minute, and quite a lucid writer who basically argues in his book against seeing systems as either capitalistic or socialist, because most economies, he says, tend to be hybrids. Even the U.S., the avatar of capitalism that it is, has some socialist elements like the sizable public sector and cooperative ownership arrangements. And this is an important point, this idea of taking the hybrid view, because for Pelle it's key, since it then opens the way towards thinking of a kind of gradual shift instead of a sudden rupture in the American system away from the influence of the market economy and towards forms of organization that would be more publicly or cooperatively owned or managed. I mean, if we already have socialist elements, why not build on those? And Pelle's point is that such a shift is increasingly urgent because, he says, if capitalism doesn't reform, it will lead to ever greater inequalities of income and concentrations of wealth that will undermine democracy. He does recognize at the outset of the book that the political left has, in its long-standing critique of capitalism, often failed to produce an alternative program with real persuasive power. But he says that the Danish and Nordic example can serve as a model, not for the undoing of capitalism, but for its measured transformation into a more pluralistic economy that would support different forms of ownership. Anyway, there's a lot to unpack in this argument of Pelle's, and guiding the conversation this evening will be Joe Guinan. He's a former journalist and one-time program director at the Aspen Institution, and now president of the Democracy Collaborative, which is a think tank founded at the University of Maryland 25 years ago that focuses on community wealth building and environmental and social sustainability. And Joe also has co-authored 2 books, The Case for Community Wealth Building, which came out in 2020, and the year before, People Get Ready, Preparing for a Corbyn Government. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Pelle Dragsted and Joe Guinan.
So welcome, Pelle. Welcome to Washington, D.C. Welcome to Donald Trump's America. It's heartening that you're here. It gives me great courage to face the border next time I go on international travel. So they're still apparently letting in dangerous reds. So it's good that you're here with us, and welcome to Washington, D.C. I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation tonight around what I think is a very powerful and important book that in the particular moment that we're in, which can seem very dark, very difficult, opens up new ways of thinking about political economic change and the pathways for getting there. And so we're going to dive into Pelle's thinking, which I think in some ways summarizes a decade or maybe 2 decades of innovation and new thinking on the left, and brings it together in a very powerful argument. And so it's great that you'll hear a little bit about that and then hopefully pick up the book and read it at your leisure. So before we get into the book, though, just a couple of questions by way of setting the scene, if you like. I can't start without asking you, first of all, what's it like to have Donald Trump try and take part of your country? Because Greenland, obviously, long-standing part of Denmark, and very unexpectedly in the news at the beginning of the Trump administration. So how did that land?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you to Politics and Prose for hosting this event. This is the first book launch event of tour to 8 cities and states of the US. So I'm really quite nervous, but I hope that even that it isn't my native language, that I'll make myself understandable. So yeah, Greenland, actually it was a totally wake up kind of moment for the Danish. We know Denmark have been a really close ally to the US for many years. And I know I was invited to this kind of, meeting with the government. And when Trump were elected, they were pretty sure that we had enough money in the bank, if you would say, in the American administration. So no, we shouldn't be afraid of anything. And when he was starting to talk about Greenland, no, it was just, yeah. But then, in fact, they discovered that he meant it. And for the Danish public, for the Danes, this was really a crazy moment. And I think it's kind of, without making hard comparisons, that we felt a little bit like, nations in the global south getting threatened by American military might. And it's a total new situation for Danish publicity. So actually, you cannot talk about the relation between Denmark and the US today without talking about Greenland. It has totally changed. Also, the mood among the population towards the US. So we have a big campaign in Denmark among consumers not buying American goods, of course not buying Teslas. We had this kind of, the sale of the Teslas. It went more rapid downwards than Elon Musk could put his arm up. So it was just like this. So yeah, so it has been a big change, and I think it's still a shock for many Danish people that an old-time ally is acting this way towards us, especially for the government, because they were, I think our Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, she said once for one year ago that you shouldn't be able to put a paper sheet between the US and Denmark. So you understand that what is happening now has been, quite a shock.
So if there are any Canadians here, I'm sure they'll sympathize with you along those lines as well.
Yeah.
So
not to talk about Panama or, yeah.
Exactly.
even worse examples.
Let's move to you, if you don't mind. And I'm sure people would love to hear a little bit about your backstory. Like, how did you come to write a book about Nordic socialism? How are these your politics? How did this all come about for you personally? What's your journey that brought you here?
Yeah, actually, I think I wrote the book because I really found it missing. I missed a book who, the left historically has been really good at kind of criticizing capitalism, and that's not really hard. It's really to argue that capitalism, at least capitalism left to itself, is inherently bad and is not kind of creating societies with possibilities and freedom for the majority. And right now also is kind of threatening the very biological foundation of our planet. So we have, volumes of left-wing literature criticizing capitalism. But what we have been extremely bad at has been to put forward a viable alternative and to try to answer all the hard questions that this kind of systemic change raises. Because it's easy to say we should democratize ownership, but then the questions arise, who should own? How do you avoid new kind of bad practices? It's easy to say that the market should not dominate our life, but what do you put in place of price signals, for example? Is it possible at all to have an effective economy without the market principles as a dominating way of organizing distribution and production? So all these questions, if we really want to convince a majority that we could move to another model, a more democratic economic model, we need to be able to answer these questions. And at least when I wrote this book, I couldn't find, good books answering this question. So that was kind of, and I think the historical moment was important because we had the financial crisis. Before that, the left had been kind of marginalized and on the defensive for many years. So maybe we didn't need. I didn't feel kind of the urgency to deliver these answers. But after the financial crisis, it was so obvious that we needed to move to another model. It was so obvious that the unfair results of the crisis and that we couldn't continue kind of with this model. And then we had the two parallel developments with Corbyn in the UK and with the first Sanders campaign in the US. And it's kind of taking power was suddenly, for a left, democratic socialism was suddenly kind of possible. It could happen. And in that situation, it was so obvious that we wasn't ready. And Joe wrote this really inspiring and lucid book, Get Ready, that was kind of a call to the left. Hey, you need to go from these slogans or treating socialism as some kind of intellectual utopia. You need to get practical. What is the model that we want to move in the direction of, and how do you take the first steps? And my book, well, it is a contribution to that. And what I found was that, and we will get back to that actually the Nordic experience offers important lessons, important experiences that shows that it's possible to organize economic enterprise in ways that are not dominated by an economic elite, that you can have effective economic enterprise in a democratic framework, and that socialism is not kind of a distant utopia. It's practices, it's experiences that we already have in cooperatives, in our public sector, in non-profits that actually, for example, in Denmark, 1 in every 3rd person is employed in our democratic public sector. Our second largest grocery store chain is owned by its customers. Our biggest mortgage lender is owned by its customers, and I could just continue. So it's a living example that it's not utopian to think about having your economic activities in a democratic framework. So I felt that from a Nordic perspective and a Danish perspective, I could contribute with some ideas and some experiences that maybe also could inspire in other parts of the world. And therefore, of course, I'm really excited that my book is out in English, and I really hope that you will enjoy it. And if it can contribute just a little bit to, if I may say, the other U.S., because the good thing about what is happening here is we know that I would say today a majority of the population in the U.S. have a dream of another direction. They don't want Trumpism. So if the ideas can contribute just a little bit to making this movement stronger and to give them arguments for how to move in the direction of a more fair economic model, where it's not billionaires who kind of dominate, but it's working people, I would be really, really happy.
So we definitely want to get into the practicalities and the model of political economy that you're laying out. But before we do that, just sticking with you as a politician, you're right that this is a moment in which socialism is reappearing, conversations are restarting, the financial crisis blew the doors off of the existing economic model, and now there's a struggle about what comes next. And so just as a politician, what's your assessment of how the crisis is playing out so far in Europe and the United States? Because while we are seeing this resurgence of socialistic ideas and economic alternatives are reappearing, it does seem so far that the principal beneficiary of the crisis has really been the populist far right, if you look all around the world. Why is that?
Because the left has not been brilliant enough, I should say. That's the only question, because what Trump has done with the Republican Party, kind of turning it totally around, should have been done with the Democratic Party, but from a left-wing perspective. And I think it's possible. Because, so that's a simple question. That's a simple answer to your question, that we haven't been good enough at, when I was younger, the left, our discussion was so intellectual. It was the time of Anthony Negri and Michael Hart and all this kind of really, complicated intellectual discussions, instead of trying to get into how do we, in a practical manner, take the first step in the direction of another and more democratic way of organizing our economy that kind of counter the oligarchic influence. But Rosa Luxemburg, the German socialist, once said that we had to choose between socialism or barbary. And actually, I think the moment that we are in right now is really kind of reinforcing that argument, because, it's quite a banal, but the only reason that these right-wing populists have been able to get to power is because of in the US the establishment of the Democratic Party, who rather gave up the power to Trump than to carry through progressive reforms. So and it's the same that you see in France with Macron, or right now Keir Starmer in the UK is kind of burning down one of the oldest Labour Party in Europe, and it's so difficult to understand, because they didn't even need to kind of do radical socialist reforms. They should just show the people that they can change their life in a positive direction, capping rents, making the minimum wage go up, it's not rocket science. And by doing that, I think, with the experience with Bernie Sanders, they rather had Trump than Bernie. But if a movement led by Bernie Sanders had been allowed to carry through a political program for the elections that in fact could have made people's life more secure, that you're secure in your job, that your kids can be in a kindergarten without you paying 25 kroners or $35,000 a year. It's crazy from a Danish view. But so I think that's more or less, and then the question arises, why? Why can't the elites of these centrist parties do that? And my answer to this question is what I call oligarchic power. It's not because they don't want, maybe they don't want, but it's because that capitalism left to itself inherently creates this enormous inequality, economic inequality, and that inequality is not only unfair, it's also will eventually undermine democracy, because economic power and wealth transfers into political power. And it's banal to say that to a US public, because you have just witnessed an election where a billionaire bought votes, financed the campaign of a president and after that was nominated to, at least for a while, to a very important position in the government, and a politic that, of course, is kind of helping this billionaire class. So a main argument of my book is that if we should be able to break that kind of dependence to this economic elite, we need to address the issue of ownership. We need to address capitalism, because if not, we will have inequality. The inequality will lead to dominance from this billionaire class, and that eventually will lead to right-wing populists taking over. Because, when normal working people, they experience that the parties that they once believed, and social democracy has been a great success. We should remember that. New Deal in the US, but in European ground, in the post-war decades, working class people were lifted out of poverty. Their freedom was expanded. It was a revolution for working people that happened during this decades. So, but now the experience is different. People experience that, it doesn't matter if we vote for Social Democrats or for the right-wing parties, and here it doesn't matter if we vote Democrats or Republican, because the result will be the same. And that is because of oligarchic power, that the two parties they're not able to do otherwise, because if people try to do, if a politician try to do otherwise, they are just wiped away by oligarchic power, by the wealth and the economic control of the economic elite. So we need to break out of that pattern. So being a socialist for me today is not only about fairness, it's really about democracy. I would go to say that if you want democracy, you need to be a democratic socialist.
That's a big claim, and it's quite brave to be going around the United States talking about a book with socialism on the cover, but actually these are not arguments that are unfamiliar in the American context. Martin Luther King, at the end of his life, said something very similar to what you just said about democratic socialism. There's also the famous quotation attributed to the Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis, who said, "We can have a democratic society, or we can have the concentration of great wealth in the hands of a few. We cannot have both." Exactly. And so this is increasingly the point that we're up against in the system. I guess what has changed if you look back at that post-war period that you were talking about, that great period of expansion and progress where wages went up as well as profits and life expectancy extended and all the indicators were moving in the right direction. You know, that came to a halt, right, when we exited what the French call the Trente Glorieuses, the 30 glorious years, and we got neoliberalism, and we got Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and all the things that have flowed from that over the past 40 years. And what that has done is created a political economy in which the billionaire class now has enough economic power to purchase our politics, right? And so what you're doing in your book is very important in that context, because what you're saying is, if I understand it correctly, and people want to hear about this from you, not from me, but you know, the old model of thinking about reform versus revolution is not really the applicable one. The movements of the left that were dominant in the 20th century, social democracy or state socialism, right, have both burned themselves out in some ways. And so we're not expecting a revolutionary rupture, and if there is one, it might well be one to the right, as we've seen. And we're also in a situation in which it's not possible to bring about widespread social democratic or liberal reform. And so in that sort of vice-like situation, what you're offering, if I understand it correctly, is a way to start to construct a different economy based on things that are already all around us, looking at just everyday socialism, the socialism of the everyday in the way in which we organize sectors or enterprises or different parts of our economy. Is that a fair distillation of what you're actually saying in the book?
Yeah, kind of the theoretical key message in the book is that, well, on the left, but also more broadly, we have always talked about capitalism as kind of totality, that we're talking about our society as a capitalist society, the economy as a capitalist economy, the market as a capitalist market, and some even would talk about that we are capitalist humans. But what I try to argue in the book is that capitalism is not a totality. It's not all encompassing. Actually, it's coexist. So capitalist social relations, way of organizing production, have always coexisted with alternative ways of organizing production, and the Nordics is a really good example of that. If I just give you some examples from the Danish economy. So we have, of course, a big public sector that delivers education, healthcare, elderly care, childcare, and that is a democratic economy. There's no profiteers in the public sector. There's and you don't buy the services on a market. You did that before, but what was before commodities was de-commodified and turned into social rights. So this is a whole sector that is organized by a kind of democratic planning, because there's no market transactions. You have the rights to have this services because you pay your taxes, and you could say it's according to what socialists call, how do we say that in English? According to your needs.
Each according to their ability, to each according to their needs.
Exactly. That's the way welfare, universal welfare is organized. But then you also have a big democratic sector in the private sector of the economy. In Denmark, and I could speak volumes about that, we had the cooperative movement that was founded in the agricultural sector, not by socialists, actually, by liberal Democrats in the 19th century. And they expanded broadly, and all the agricultural sector of Denmark actually was in a democratic framework for many, many years, and big parts still are today. Our biggest, as I said, the second biggest grocery chain is owned by 1.5 million citizens. It's kind of every 5 Dane. Our biggest mortgage lender is owned by its customers. One in every 5 housing units in Denmark, and I think this will come as a shock for an American public, is owned by non-profit cooperatives in a national system of cooperatives. So it's not only the house that is cooperative, it's a cooperative system of housing. So when this one house is built, they take from a cooperative economy, and when they have paid their debt after 30 years, they put money back in the cooperative economy in order to build new co-op housing. So that's and what I was and actually it's quite funny because in the Danish left we have not been thinking about this so much. So my parents, for example, on the left, they would maybe look to, some Yugoslavia or maybe Cuba in the 70s. But at that time, outside their own windows, they had, in my eyes, a more socialist economy than a lot of these countries because they were they're not attractive. They are, not democratic. They're totalitarian countries. So, but we didn't acknowledge this, and actually, it was kind of the surgeons of Bernie Sanders, AOC, and others pointing to the Nordic as inspiration for their democratic socialism that made me and the Danish left kind of led to a reappraisal. Okay, yeah. Because the first reaction when they talked about Denmark or the Nordics being socialist was, no way. Okay, we have a welfare and so on, but it's not socialist. But thinking about it, and that kind of led me to write the book, it's obvious that if you define capitalism as a system where the means of production or the productive apparatus is owned by capital owners and they exchange their goods and services on a market, if that's capitalism, we have a big chunk of our economy in Denmark and the Nordic that is outside capitalism. So
can I just on this point, if I may, I just want to read everybody 2 paragraphs. The first one, the second is from you. The first one, I'm interested if you've heard of this before or not, because I think what you're doing is making a very innovative and important new argument, but you're also resurrecting some very old arguments. So when I was reading your book, one thing it reminded me of and sent me back to my bookshelves, I pulled up this old book by Sidney Webb from 1890, one of the original Fabians, who wrote a short book called Socialism in England. And towards the end of that book, Webb says, quote, "The practical man, oblivious or contemptuous of any theory of the social organism or general principles of social organization, has been forced by the necessities of the time into an ever-deepening collectivist channel. Socialism, of course, he still rejects and despises. The individualist town councillor will walk along the municipal pavement, lit by the municipal gas and cleansed by municipal brooms with municipal water, and seeing by the municipal clock in the municipal market that he is too early to meet his children, coming from the municipal school hard by the county lunatic asylum and municipal hospital, will use the national telegraph system to tell them not to walk through the municipal park, but to come to the municipal tramway to meet him in the municipal reading room by the municipal art gallery, museum, and library, where he intends to consult some of the national publications in order to prepare his next speech in the municipal town hall in favor of the nationalization of canals and the increase of the government's control over the railway system. Socialism, sir, he will say, don't waste the time of a practical man by your fantastic absurdities. Self-help. So individual liberty, that's what made our city what it is today. Right? So I pulled this paragraph up because, in fact, there's a modern-day version of exactly the equivalent in Pelle's book. So let me just give you one paragraph from the start of chapter 3, where he talks about the communal economy, a part of our history. It is Saturday morning, and you wake up in your apartment in northwest Copenhagen, a property built in 1941 by the workers of the Danish Cooperative Housing Union. You are a renter, but also a kind of owner, since the property is owned by the cooperative and you are a member, and thus participate in choosing the leadership. You're happy to live here, not least because rent is affordable, and because you and your neighbors yourselves are the owners, only you can raise it. You hop out of bed and head to the bathroom. The water in which you bathe is provided by a corporation owned by a conglomerate of municipal governments within the greater Copenhagen area. The same is true of the company that heats your apartment. And electricity is provided through a grid owned by the cooperative, consumer cooperative Andel, and on and on. And so basically, this is a different way of thinking about the economy and looking about what's right under our nose, but actually takes us all the way back to that sort of fundamental principle of political economy, which is who actually owns and controls things.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, and thank you for reading it. Yeah, and that's and also a big thanks to your work, Joe, and the Democracy Collaborative, because your efforts have been more or less on the same note, trying to deliver, and not from taking down from some kind of utopian pie in the sky, but doing practical experiences like the Evergreen Cooperative and of course the Preston community in the UK. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Democracy Collaborative together with also British think tanks have done really important work in creating and showing that it's possible to make democratic economies on a local level, but of course it's also possible on a national and in some instances on an international level. So I think that is our most important task right now. It's to make it viable that, democratic economy is not a utopia. It is here. It functions. And to point to the Nordic countries is important because the Nordic countries, not only as I see it, it's not because the Nordic countries are a paradise. There's a lot of problems, and we could speak volumes about that. But I think it is some of the countries in the world who secures the best life for their citizens, the best possibilities for their youth. So, but not only that, the important thing is that, there's this tale from the right wing that when the welfare is strong and you have a big state, that it kind of reduces individual liberty. But I really try to challenge that also in my book because it's so obvious that it's the opposite. Let me just give you one example. In Denmark, education is free, and you are actually paid when you go to any kind of education, so you can live from what you're paid. And of course, that system gives you, even if your parents are not affluent, the freedom to choose the education that you want. A freedom that, for example, young kids in America from not affluent families do not have. Or, for example, our way of, what do you call it, when you are laid off, you have a social security. It's a kind of combination of a public grant and a collective insurance in the trade unions. So you have a salary you can live from while you are getting a new job. And of course, that makes you more free to quit your job if your employer is an asshole, if I may say so. I don't know the politeness of a US debate. Okay. So it's obvious that strong welfare is, as I have called it in a Danish debate, a freedom machine. We could create freedom every day for real citizens. We would take freedom down from this, abstract discussions of some of the right-wing pundits and make it to what really matters to people in their daily life. It's obvious that welfare creates more individual freedom. And a last important point is that the Nordic countries is also really rich economies. So you would think that if you have a high tax and a big state, and you pay people for not to work when they're laid off, that would create a less effective economy. But our productivity in Denmark, for example, is higher than the US productivities. Then you work a lot more in the US, so your wealth is bigger, but that's only because we chose to reduce the working week, have 6 weeks of paid vacation, 1 year paid paternal leave, right to maternal and paternal leave. So actually, it's we have an example to point to that it is possible to have and develop a much more socialist economy, but because that's the theoretical point of my book, that a economy and a society can be more or less socialist. It's not a binary choice. So, okay, Denmark is also a country dominated mostly by capitalist social relation, but we are much more socialist than, for example, the US or the UK, for that sake. So we can choose to put more socialism into that mix, and that's actually what I try to suggest in the book. And the biggest part of the book actually is about really practical ideas of how to do it, and it's practical ideas founded on real experiences in the Nordics, but also inspired by, for example, the cooperative movement of France, of Spain, of Italy. Unfortunately, if I should do some critique to my own book, it's a little bit Eurocentric, because the cooperative movement, of course, is really strong in the global south also. An area like Kerala in India is, I think, the most cooperatively densely state in the world, for example. But yeah, it could have been better in that way.
So I think we should move in just a second to questions and see what people want to know about this. But just on your point about the United States, I mean, absolutely, these traditions are more well known as part of the European social model, but it's not as if there isn't something to build on here. Exactly. 1 in 3 Americans is in a co-op.
Yeah.
That's like 130 million if you put together urban, agricultural, credit union cooperatives, right? A quarter of America's energy is provided by public utilities and co-ops, right? If you add all the credit unions together, they're bigger than Goldman Sachs and would be one of the top 5 banks, in Wall Street. So there's a tradition of this here, and I'm sure you'll get some eye rolling as you go out on the road about, oh, it's all very well for the Nordics, but these institutions of everyday socialism are all around us over here as well, if we just take a different look at them. And I think your book is a very important part of getting people to take that look. So let's invite questions and see who has questions for you. And I think we're going to take the first one here. And then if you want to get in line and ask questions at the mic, that would be great. So please, sir.
Thank you very much. If you were president of the United States, where would you start in the US to reorient our socioeconomic system to a more democratic socialist system? What do you think would be the areas in which we could convince people that the benefits of a social democratic system being applied to the provision of particular services would be successful and most beneficial to them? Where would you start?
Oh, that's a really good question. Thank you so much. I think I would start by taking new steps to de-commodify areas, and of course not least medical services. So universal healthcare would be such a big step forward, and people would feel it in their life. I'm sure you know that private bankruptcies in the US, the most of them are caused by people getting sick. And living in Denmark, that's just crazy that you allow that system to exist, that a cancer diagnosis can force you out of your house, and it's so crazy. So that would be the first I would do. And then we haven't been talking so much about the social forces that are needed to make these changes. So another thing I really would do would to enact reforms that made it easier to form trade unions, not only at each workshop, but also on a national or state level, because we should not forget that the background for all these reforms that we have in the Nordics was a strong labor movement. So I would also be very aware of how to create the social forces that could be the backbone of these kind of reforms.
What's union density in Denmark at the moment?
Yeah, it's dependent how you, but it's about 80%.
So here is 6%.
Yeah.
You get to 10% if you look at the public sector, but
Yeah.
but 6%. So it's a different ball game altogether in terms of social forces. But please, we've got a comrade from DSA here with a
The
question.
previous question and the answers that have flowed here fit right into my question. I'm a third-generation unionist. My Hungarian grandfather, my father, myself, I helped organize the union at EPA headquarters. So I wanted to know what the labor movement is like in Denmark. And secondly, the Democratic Party really blew it in 2020. We had an opportunity to see what a president who wanted to do this sort of thing. We had Bernie Sanders with a very strong popular movement, and the Democrats managed to torpedo it based on money coming in, so that's why I'm now no longer consider myself a member of the Democratic Party, but Democratic Socialist Party. So we had a chance to see what a socialist president would do, and we need to do that again. And we will see what Bernie did as a municipal executive in Vermont was quite something. Anyway, that's the name of my question. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for your service for the working class and of your family. I'm also out of a family of unionists. My mother was a social worker, and I remember when I was a kid. I think the same for you. There was always meetings going on when I was falling asleep. I think it was a big failure not to go with Bernie in that situation. But right now, it's there was kind of some years of frustration, not least also in the UK after the Corbyn experience. But I feel that there's a changing mood now. And of course, the primary election of Mamdani in New York was kind of a game changer. I have been a lot in contact with this US left, of course, in the last couple of months to plan this too. And I really felt that it was kind of, a total change of mood, that you saw that, okay, they can mobilize all their money. They can mobilize the democratic establishment, and they can do every kind of dirty election campaign, and we win. So that also for us in Denmark and in Europe, that was really, really important. And I'm going to meet with various sections of the DSA on my tour to try to broaden relations a little bit. I'm a co-founder also of a European party cooperation among all the big European left-wing forces. So we really want to also expand and deepen our relation to the US left, because I think we can learn a lot from each other. We can learn a lot from the kind of campaigns that you are doing, like the one in New York. It was really, really impressive. And I'm quite optimistic, and that sounds crazy in this world, but I really think that, the parties of right-wing populists, they won't be able to deliver on the promises. So they are strong in opposition, and if we succeed in creating an alternative that people believe in, I think it is possible to get to power, and I think it's possible to make changes. So because people are not stupid, and it was not because they were stupid that they voted for Trump. They did it because the alternative was not trustworthy, and because of their lived experiences with the Democratic Party. So I think what you're doing in the DSA is really, really important, and I really hope that you will be practical, because the worst enemy of the left is the left. Okay, you have this saying that the only thing that real socialists can agree upon is that the other real socialists aren't real socialists. So you should not go into all this kind of intellectual larum debate. Just like Mamdani did, focus on the daily life of working people. That's the recipe. And I think if we do that, I have really hope also for sorry.
It's very lovely to see you in person after watching
Speak
you on
up into
television.
the microphone.
Sure.
Thank you.
For the last 15 years in Denmark. I do have a question, though. Understanding what the economic theories here are. I have just moved back to the United States after living in Denmark for 15 years. And when I left Washington, D.C. to move to Kolding, Denmark in southern Jylland, one of the things... more? Maybe I'm too short for this. I think what was surprising to me was this general understanding that we work as a community in a nation. We have a word for it in Danish, which is called fællesskab. And so I would go to work and do my hours and teach and do what I was doing. And that was going to eventually help my 85-year-old neighbor if she needed hospitalization. With this theory, when I listen to it here now, sitting in my hometown, I hear this as what are the good things that can happen to me if I shift to a democratic socialist model. But how do you propose that we help change mentalities to understand that this is actually a model that's a social contract? It's not just something that will benefit, it's also something that will require contribution. And that's what will make the social contract that has made Denmark successful, hopefully one day successful here. But how do we change, how do you see changing the shift from a capitalist, individualistic mentality to one that is more orienteret ved fællesskabet?
It's a really good question because I'm sure you're familiar that some of the arguments against the possibility of a welfare state in the U.S. from some right-wing pundits is no, but you can't do that because it's only because we have this what do you call it? Societies with homogeneity in the Nordic countries, and it is possible to create this kind of trust in the U.S. But actually, I think they put the horse behind the cart.
The cart before the horse.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry. Okay, they put the cart before the horse because trust was created by the welfare state. The Nordic countries, they were deeply polarized in the 1920s, for example. It was some of the most unequal society on earth. So it was through creating our fællesskab. We need that word in English. That is kind of it's like common, but you need to okay. So I think trust. You create trust by inducing trust or by expanding, by creating a society that take care of people. That and of course. The other part of this is that you have a responsibility to this fællesskab from the other side. If not, it doesn't function, and that's why you can't create democratic socialism from above. You need to have a base from below. You need to have a civil society because you can do a lot of stuff from a state, but you cannot create this sense of community. That can only be created from below. So that's not to say that we don't need reforms from above, because those reforms can contribute to creating this sense of community, but you have to organize from below. And that's also why I think the way of organizing from DSA, that is kind of what workers movement did 100 years ago, being on the streets, talking to people, organizing workshops. Yeah, that's the way forward.
You get the last question.
Hi, thanks so much. This is quite related. I had some of the same thoughts, but I was wondering if you could speak specifically about migration, mass migration, and From here, it looks pretty depressing how European countries are responding to migration, and I don't see from here that like having a stronger welfare state is like a vaccine against having a lot of racism and conflict. So it's like, yeah.
Should we
That was going to
squeeze-
be my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there have been issues in Scandinavian countries about immigrants.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, that is a really good and also a hard question, because it's unfortunately right now in Denmark we have one of the most anti-migration governments in Europe, and it's a kind of a puzzle that you can combine this by this community that we were talking about, but in fact it's just most in many times same people who are fighting with their colleagues for fair wages, but at the same time can have this anti-immigration, even racist point of view, and there's no easy cure. My party, of course, we fight against this hard or brutal migration policies, but the fact is that a majority among the population supports this right now. So it's a long haul. We need to continue fighting, and then I think it's also necessary that the left is prepared to take the hard discussions. We cannot just close our eyes to the challenges that migration create. For example, if for working people, if you have a really mass migration in a short time, of course that will interfere in how the salaries will evolve. It's obvious that the weapon of the working class is to sometimes that the employers need workers more than the workers need the employers. So you have periods of time where you kind of have the upper hand. But if the employers always just can employ illegal immigrants to low salaries, that will depress wages. So we need to address. I heard Steve Bannon talking about that, okay, and I really think he's a frightening person. But it's also a problem that it's only him that addresses this very obvious issue, that there is a relationship with wages and migration. And that doesn't mean that we should say we don't want migration, but we need to be honest and to address this problem. What do we then do to secure that wages aren't depressed? So I think we should stand by our left-wing positions on these issues, and my party does that. We are not kind of giving in to because it's popular to be a racist, but we need also to be honest and to have the courage to engage in this discussion. One thing that went wrong in Denmark was that when we have a lot of migration, all the migrants that were kind of put in the same poor areas, and that created this kind of vicious circle where we had more what do you call it, crime, lower employment rate, and that fed to the racism of the right wing. So we need to address these problems. We need to be courageous and honest, but at the same time not giving a millimeter to kind of racist narrative. So we're fighting that struggle, but it's an uphill struggle right now in Denmark.
And if I may, another part of that is it's not just about the mobility of labor, it's also about the mobility of capital that has really been undermining communities, moving jobs overseas in pursuit of lower wage economies and so on. And there are a whole bunch of tools around the democratization of capital, some of which are highlighted and laid out in Pelle's book. So with that, I thank you all for coming. I hope you'll agree this has been a rich and interesting discussion. In a moment, we'll hear about how you pick up a copy of the book, which I hope you will do. I can say, having spent 25 years working on these issues that this is a dense and rich book that a lot of thought and work has gone into. I actually need to ask you how you managed to do all this reading and be a politician at the same time, because you seem to read more than I do, and it's my job. So congratulations on a really powerful book, and I hope people will pick it up and continue thinking about all the things that you've laid out for us today, Pelle.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So copies of the book are available at the checkout desk at the front. Pelle will be here signing. Please line up to the right of the table if you'd like your book signed. And please help our staff by folding up your chairs. Did you want to say one more thing?
No, it was just the question about how I got the time to read. The thing is that in my party we have this rule of rotation. So you can only be a politician or employed in the party for a certain period of time. So I was hit by that rule, so I had to go out of parliament, and that gave me the time to read and think.
I'm going to ask for a sabbatical, I think.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.